607. So we'll put some of those numbers in the chat box so that y'all can keep track of the numbers in the email that we mentioned. And we'll get going with the agenda. One thing that I think we're really excited about today is all of the amazing feedback that y'all provided at last year's session really was taken to heart in pulling together this agenda. So the guest speakers that we brought in, the topics that we wanted to make sure to cover really came from all of the amazing suggestions and expertise that y'all provided last year. So very thankful to have had that provided. And there will be an opportunity at the end of this training session to provide similar feedback that will help inform next year's agenda as well. So thank you so much for doing that. Again, we're really excited to be able to pull all of you together, to have an opportunity to learn from one another and some outside experts in preparing for any storms that may come our way this year. I know it will feel a little bit different. We were in this situation last year thinking about a natural disaster on top of the COVID-19 crisis. And so we've really got some lessons learned, I think, over the last few months that will help us kind of figure out the best way to apply them for this year's storm season. So again, thank you so much for being here. We're looking forward to the next couple hours. And I wanted to introduce our next speaker, Erlene Middleton, who serves as the Food Bank's Vice President of Public Policy and Partner Services. So I'll turn it over to Erlene.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and to say happy Thursday to you. So I'm glad that we're able to meet before storm forms in the Atlantic Ocean or the Gulf and finds its way to North Carolina. So we're glad that you're here. So I guess today we're here to talk about weather-related storms, right? But before we proceed, I just want to say thank you for being a part of this crisis or disaster of COVID-19. Many of us have had to learn how to do things differently. You survived the shortages of supplies. You survived having to do things differently. And you survived agency closures, sometimes illness, and sometimes death. So we want to say how remarkable you are and thank you. You remained open because you saw the needs in your communities. You saw the needs in our community. So we want to say thank you as we get along and talk about some weather-related disasters now. And so today you're going to learn a little bit about how the food bank prepares for a disaster. It's going to be a little bit like peeping behind the curtain, getting some good secrets, I think. So don't hold me to that, but I think so. But then hopefully it will give you some insights into why we ask you some of the questions that we ask you, why we respond the way we respond to you during a disaster. And sometimes why we just say, I don't know, let me get back to you. So we think that this is a great opportunity for you to see how we prepare. Also, you're going to learn and hear from yourselves. You all are the best. You're the experts in this, and we get to share from each other. But more importantly, we get to learn how to do it better. Each time we do this, we do it better. Let's hope that we don't have to have the practice of a storm, but at least we'll have the knowledge of how to do it better. So I just want to say thank you again. I'm excited for this conference and thank you to the team for putting it all together and everybody who's going to participate. Enjoy. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Erlene. Appreciated. Now I would love to turn it over to Carter Crane, who is our Director of Food Partnerships, to share how the food bank prepares for a disaster. Take it away, Carter.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for everybody for being here today. Again, I'll echo Erlene, just thank you guys for all of the work that you do every day. It is incredible. My role here is mainly to bring in food during all the times, but it definitely ramps up during disaster. And, you know, I never worry about the amount of food that we get in, or the type of food that we get in, or the way it's packaged, not only because of our volunteers, but also because we just have so many agencies that are ready to roll up their sleeves and know what the food means to the community. And we really couldn't do the work that we're doing, obviously, without you and the teams of volunteers and staff. So we just really appreciate you all so much. But yeah, so I'm gonna jump into this and try to be as quick as possible. My slides are a little more formal probably than my presentation style, but hopefully if you want to look back on anything, all that information will be there. So we'll jump right in. So we kind of view disasters as three separate phases, right? We're all in the relief planning and preparation now. We've kind of lived there, kind of always thinking about it here in North Carolina, especially with the last 5 years with Hurricane Matthew and Florence and Michael, and then the pandemic on top of all of that. So yeah, last year was a really scary hurricane season because we were dealing with a lot of unknowns. But like Erlene said, having been through these 3 in the last 5 years plus a pandemic, we have gotten better at our operations. We've gotten better at post-disaster relief, thinking about it, what we did right, what we did wrong, how to improve our planning, how to continue to communicate out. So yeah, it is a wild ride, disasters, as you all know. So we can go ahead to the next slide. So once hurricane season starts, which, you know, June 1st, we try to be more thoughtful in the type of foods we are bringing in. As you all know, the food does not stay long at the food bank in our warehouses. It kind of comes in and moves out. We basically refill our warehouses about every 2 to 3 weeks. On average. So we try to be more thoughtful. You know, is the food coming in now? Would it work in a disaster type family box? Is it ready to go if people lose electricity? While it's not perfect, you know, we don't say no to anything really. We want to make sure that we're providing as much food as we can. But then, you know, the second phase of that, once we know a hurricane or a tropical storm has started to make noise out in the ocean, we're getting really thoughtful on what kind of food is around. You know, we check with other food banks, our partners in North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, even down to Florida. You know, what do you guys have that's available? We start talking to Feeding America. Hey, this tropical storm or this hurricane looks like it could be coming to North Carolina. What are your thoughts? Where is food staged? Have donors reached out already? You know, if we know, hey, it could be coming close. You know, when do we start building family boxes? Especially during the pandemic, family boxes have really been an easy way to get a nice variety of food to you, and therefore you to our families. I know a lot of you had to switch to drive-through models. A lot of you had to change your operations, and those family boxes definitely made part of that easier. Not everything can be in a nice box, but you know, what can we do in those boxes? What can those boxes be full of? This year is the first year we'll have 12 truckloads of disaster boxes just for our service area for hurricane season. So that's great. We'll have 5 loads of water ready to go. You know, the most stressful time for a hurricane for me is probably those first 3 to 5 days, as donors are responding, as communities are responding, as Feeding America, as we're assessing. So, you know, if we can have good supply of food for those first 3 to 5 days, then the food does keep flowing after that. You can go to the next slide. Next slide. Well, I'll keep going anyway. Next slide when you have a chance. So once we know hurricane is looking at North Carolina specifically, the organization sets up what we call our emergency action team. It's a cross-department, cross-branch group of diverse staff from multiple different arenas. Our president, our VP of Ops, our VP of Partner Services, reps from food sourcing, communications, transportation. I won't read it all, but anyone that, their role is going to be majorly impacted by a disaster. Their day-to-day job responsibilities will change if a hurricane hits our service area. All come in the room. Talking about lessons learned. One year we didn't think one of our branches would be affected by the hurricane that was coming. Well, the hurricane turned at the last minute and that branch was affected, even though it wasn't on those first couple calls. So those first couple calls, every branch is going to be on there to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Try not to limit who you think is going to be affected, bring everybody that needs to be there in, and then give them marching orders to communicate out to their teams. Communication is the hardest thing to do. A lot of those people in that room have direct things they need to be doing after those meetings. But we got to communicate out to the people that are doing the work, the people that are expected to know what's happening, to put communication plans in place from those meetings. But this is days before landfall. Hopefully, that's the one nice-ish thing about a hurricane is we usually know it's coming for a little while, even if we don't know where it's going to hit directly. We know kind of that it's coming to North Carolina, that it could come up our way. Where do we think the storm could impact? Again, we're really thoughtful. What additional resources do we need? We learned one year that definitely there are some staff, especially our outreach coordinators, that they are definitely ramped up and they could use some extra staff assistance. So how do we fill that need? Do we fill it with volunteers? Do we fill it with temporary employees? Do we, how do we, Feeding America send support? But we know that department needs more support during those times just because of all the outreach that needs to happen, all the phone calls that need to happen. Update your phone trees. How are you going to get in touch with your staff if the power goes out? How are you going to get in touch with your staff to make sure they're okay? Make sure everybody's cell numbers are the same. I think for that team, that emergency action team, making sure in that first meeting, who's missing? Did we lose anybody? Did somebody retire? Did somebody leave to go somewhere else? Who's taking their place? Have that person been invited? How do we get the word to everyone? Other resources we need. We know we're going to need additional warehouse space. We know we're going to need additional drivers. What resources are we feeling that we're lacking? Go ahead to the next slide. And if I'm talking too fast, someone put in the chat box, Carter, you're talking too fast. So again, hurricanes coming, starting to look more and more like North Carolina is in the path. What are we doing? We're checking with you guys. We're checking with the partner agencies, especially the disaster agencies. What are your needs? How are you feeling prepared? How's your food supply? Feeding America, checking back in again. There are overall kind of umbrella. It's a network of 200 food banks. So how are they feeling about it? What other Feeding America food banks are going to be impacted? Locally here, we're talking it's time to reach out to the Division of Emergency Management, NCVOAD, Voluntary Organizations in Disasters, American Red Cross, National Guard, some of our vendors. We do purchase some food, as you all know. Our food donors that are here in North Carolina, how are they feeling? Do they have supplies to donate if we are impacted? Extra warehouse space is huge. Food comes in from all over the country. I think Florence, we had 40 plus states sending us food to North Carolina. It was unbelievable by the truckloads. Food was coming in the mail from 40 plus states. When that's the difference with the hurricane as the pandemic is, the whole world is watching because the whole world sees the impact. And so in much of the world, at least this country, wants to help out. So it is incredible seeing folks wanting to give back and help out when we go through these times. But rental equipment, we need, we want to be first in line for a generator. Because if our warehouses lose electricity and we've got frozen product in there, we want a backup generator to make sure we're not losing any good product right away. Forklifts, what other extra supplies are we going to need to make sure that we can have the food coming in, we can unload it very quickly and efficiently, and we want to make sure we can move it back out to our partners. Next slide. Getting into the weeds a little bit more, 72 hours before the landfall. Again, the nice thing about that is true. Aaron just reminded there was a college, an aviation school in Tennessee that wanted to bring us a food drive. They heard roads were closed and we couldn't get to Wilmington at that time. They literally flew a plane, a food drive to our, the airport in Wilmington, and we had a driver meet the plane out there to bring in food. So it is incredible hearing stories of people that want to give back. 72 hours before landfall. Again, we're reviewing with the staff. What are you going to be responsible for? One of our things is, even when a large majority of our service area is impacted, everyone in our service area that our agencies are serving, the people in need in our area, are going through a disaster in their life with or without a hurricane. So we want to make sure those services continue. So who is focused on the disaster area? Who is keeping our normal day-to-day work moving forward? We split up those responsibilities to make sure there's clear point of contacts for each different thing. You need alternate points of contact because people need rest. People need to take time off. People need to be able to, not work 24/7, which it does seem like in disasters, that is a need. But who else who are the people's backup for key positions? Volunteers. Volunteers are huge for us as they are for you. We need specific roles. Who's packing boxes? Who can help making phone calls? Who can help making deliveries? All kinds of things that we learned during the COVID, the pandemic. We had to do things such a different way, but that definitely meant we could think about things in a different way too. So what did we learn from that? Alert donors of alternate warehouse space. I think a lot of donors bring us food in tractor trailers. They just come to our location because it's in their system. If we wanted to go somewhere else, we need to make sure they know where they're going. I think we've talked about some of those other bullet points. So again, 48 hours, it's getting closer now. We really know that it's going to impact somewhere in North Carolina, or we really believe it is. We are preparing now for manual operations. What happens if the power goes out? So much right now is computer controlled. Our inventory is all in the computer. All of our paperwork goes, directly into the computer. So manual operations, a lot of times we've had to operate an offsite warehouse that didn't have electricity. And so we need to make sure we can still track the food. Donors still want to make sure that their food is getting to people safely. So if there was a recall, where did that food go? So we need to have a paper trail. Start making sure all your drivers with all your vehicles are filling up before the end of the day so that they start the next day with a full tank. You can kind of get away with it sometimes during the normal operating, but once you kind of come in contact with a disaster, you don't want to be waiting hours for gasoline or run out of gas if you're trying to get food someplace. We've had rising waters at some of our facilities where, cars have been damaged, outside forklifts have been damaged. So, bring that stuff in. Like, again, lessons learned, right? What got damaged last time? Well, we had a car sitting outside and a forklift sitting outside that got totally ruined. Well, okay, let's bring those inside or park them at another spot. Staff take the car home, to a higher land, trying to make sure you're not making the same mistakes again and again. Next slide. So 24 hours into the landfall. Thank you. We want to make sure that if the hurricane does speed up, we are not trying to deliver food when the landfall is starting. We want to make sure staff is home safely. We want to make sure we're not putting agencies in a bad spot. So 18 hours before landfall, we've done as much as we can. Now let's make sure staff, families, volunteers are all in a safe place. Kind of conduct final review of procedures. Conduct final review of preparation, planning steps, secure food bank facilities 12 hours prior to landfall, at least. Contact Feeding America one more time. The EOC. Remind all staff to charge your cell phones. This is a day and age where we really rely on these cell phones being charged. But if we lose electricity for a couple of days, start off without those problems. Next slide. So landfall. So this is the start of phase 2, disaster relief operations. We're going to activate the emergency action team that we talked about earlier. We want to conduct a disaster relief assessment. How are the staff? Anybody lose power? Anybody leave the area? How are they doing? How are their homes? Key volunteers, same thing. Activate the staffing plan and disaster relief organizational structure. Again, who's doing what? Who's responsible for what? Is anybody out of pocket because their family comes first, their house comes first, they need to figure that out, but who's going to step in and take those responsibilities? That's why everybody should have a backup if possible, because sometimes, life happens and the hurricane messes with your house or those you love, but we still want people to get fed, so we need to have a backup plan. I think that's one of the things we learned really after Matthew is just how to continue to take care of staff, key volunteers. We were providing lunches for the people that were working on site, so they didn't have to worry about that. Whatever things that you can do to make life a little bit easier for those that are trying to help out. Again, you're organizing disaster operations because every single hurricane is different. Much of our disaster plan, you kind of have to, I don't want to say throw away, but because it is a good resource to have, but every disaster is so different. You're definitely learning on the fly. You want to make sure you're communicating out to folks. You want to make sure that that you're taking advantage of opportunities for food supplies, that you are hearing where the need is. That's why it's so important those first few days to hear from our agency network, to hear from you all, try to figure out who's been affected, where are you affected, what do you need, where electricity's out. Our transportation person has to focus on DOT and road closures to make sure we're not sending trucks in directions where there's road closures. We had a commercial carrier coming in from, I think it was Pennsylvania a couple of years ago, that was coming to our New Bern branch. Roads were clear, then they weren't. The waters rose and the roads were blocked. We ended up diverting that truck to one of our agencies. So kind of knowing what you can accept is huge for us. We definitely learned a lot during the pandemic and the CFAP program that was, doing a lot of vendor to agency deliveries. We learned a lot about capacity that we didn't know before, that we just have never been pushed into that knowing that way before. So that number 7, conduct outreach efforts. That's a huge part, because if we don't know your needs, it's hard to know where to start. Disasters can be such a huge impact, especially hurricanes. We need to hear from you, email, text, phone call, whatever the best way is of communication with you, so that we know where to start. We want to hit the ground running as much as we can and in a safe way, make sure the food's safe, make sure our staff is safe, make sure y'all's staff and volunteers are safe, but try to get it to you as quickly as you can, because we know that you will not only be meeting the needs of your regular clients, but also meeting the needs of folks that have never used your services before. So how do we communicate that out to the community at large? If someone has never been to a food pantry before, but has just been been through a hurricane and now they're looking for more food supplies, they need to know how to get to you all. So that's part of it as well. I think I motored through that as fast as I could. So I will kick it back to Jessica.
Thank you, Carter. Appreciate that. I think, not having had a storm yet this year, that presentation was kind of helpful to get back in the mindset of how we do operate and lessons learned over the years from those different storms, and kind of remembering what it was like to be in that mode. So definitely appreciate it, and some good tips and tools, I think, regardless of the size of an organization, and really highlighting the way that we all work together in a storm. So thank you, appreciate it. Just a reminder that if folks have questions for Carter, or questions just kind of in general about that presentation, feel free to type them in the chat, and we'll get to them during the Q&A segment that's coming up. And now we are going to give an opportunity to hear from our peers, best practices, lessons learned. We'll start with Daniel Altino from Catholic Charities, the Diocese of Raleigh, and then we'll move right into Pastor Brian Cornelius from Adelphia CDC. So thank you both for joining us and sharing some of your expertise. Daniel, are you on mute? I know that we went through and kind of muted a few folks. You can give a
Yes,
minute.
sorry about that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Welcome.
you for letting me know.
Sure.
Thank you for having us. We're excited to be a partner of the food bank at Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Raleigh, and we're excited to be here and hopefully sharing some of the lessons we've learned and our best practices with everyone else. My contact information is up on the slide right now. I also dropped it in the chat box. I'm going to touch on some high-level things here, but feel free to reach out to me offline if we don't get to anything in the Q&A. I'm happy to provide more detail at a later time. So if you could go to the next slide, please. The first thing I want to touch on is how we work with others. Disasters are becoming more and more comprehensive, more and more overwhelming, and so finding good partners is really key to success for us at Catholic Charities. And so obviously the food bank is a core partner for us, and then there are other groups and collaborations that we found really important. Previously mentioned was North Carolina VOAD, and that's a strong group that we work with, and long-term recovery groups as a subset of North Carolina VOAD to provide that more local approach to services. That's really where the most work for us gets done, is within those local long-term recovery groups, really being in the community and being with community leaders and the survivors we're trying to help. One of the phrases that I've heard a lot, and you may have heard as well, is no trading business cards at a time of disaster. Really, it's a lot of what we focus on during blue sky times is that networking and that relationship building so that we have the connections and are more likely to be able to get in contact people when something happens, as opposed to trying to make new connections and meet people for the first time once an event strikes. One of the big things in trying to figure out who to partner with and network with is thinking outside of the box for us. As I mentioned earlier, disasters are becoming more comprehensive, and so it's becoming much more all hands on deck to respond to these disasters. And so we're trying to move away from focusing partnerships on kind of mission-driven disaster groups, where it's clearly stated in their mission that they do disaster work, and thinking about all of the groups that have skills and expertise that can be brought into the disaster world. And so really trying to get creative with those partnerships and find new people to work with. One of the populations we really prioritize trying to work with is the Latino and Hispanic populations. So one group that I want to highlight is Defensores de la Comunidad Latina in NC. That's a collaboration of various grassroots Latino and Hispanic-led organizations that sprung up during the COVID-19 response around food distribution, but it's continued in general disaster preparation. And so I've learned a lot working with that group, hearing responses from that group, and really look forward to connecting more as we move forward in disaster planning at Catholic Charities. In addition to Defensores is working with the Hispanic and Latino populations, churches are another group that we really prioritize working with, and also going out onto many of the farms and working directly and being present with the agricultural workers where they are, where they live, realizing that transportation is an issue. And we'll talk about that transportation in a little bit. Next slide, please. And so for us, the first thing we need to do is take care of ourselves and have a strong foundation before we're able to serve the community. And so that means agency preparedness. And for us, many of the themes and the points that were just previously talked about carry over and apply to us. And so it's about having that plan, that detailed plan I saw a lot of similarities with what was just presented. And then one of the other things I want to highlight is having that plan, practicing that plan, find ways to put it into action, and then reviewing that plan. Review it after you practice it, review it before hurricane season, review it after post-event, to always identify areas that can be improved, contact information that needs to be updated, changes. Your plan can't be something that just sits on a shelf. It really needs to be active and continually updated. The other important thing is contingency planning. How are you going to work during a disaster? How are you going to access facilities? One of the things for us is talking to our landlords, making sure that we can get into our buildings, especially buildings that are controlled by fobs and electronic keys, making sure that we have hard keys so that if power goes out, we still can access our food, access our supplies, and start serving the community as quickly as possible. And a lot of what we do right after the disaster is that food distribution. So what are we doing right before a storm with our food? And then what are we doing after a storm? What food do we want people to have before a storm so that they can sustain on their own in case there are delays in getting food out to the community? And we also have a push on getting our perishable food out so that nothing goes to waste. And also, you don't want to be cleaning up frozen meat that has been sitting in 2 or 3 weeks of North Carolina heat. So making sure that all of that gets out in a way that can be utilized before the storm. And then after the storm, distributing those family boxes that we get through the food bank of food that's easy to consume, kind of ready to eat, and really accessible when it's a challenging situation for families. Next slide, please. So how did we get to that disaster plan that I mentioned everyone should have? How do we create that? We look to use past experience. Unfortunately, we have a lot of that with Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Florence. And then we look to plan for what we can control. And so for us, that's things like our voucher process. We know what account codes to use. We know what forms to use. That's not going to change. But then also planning for what we can't control. There are going to be certain things like where we want to set up a point of distribution. We can't know that we're going to set up on 4th and Main before a storm. That's going to vary, but we can plan for a couple of different points of distribution to know that we would have access. And then a lot of our planning for the unknown is more thought process planning. What if kind of checklists of if we need to do this, these are the things we need to think of. So you don't have to be coming up with the process while you're in the middle of a disaster. You just have to be responding to questions to get through it and be effective in what you're doing. Next slide, please. And so once we've set up a strong foundation for ourselves, we're then in a position to serve and prep the community. And so how do we do that? Again, we focus on making information accessible. And again, one of the populations that we really focus on is the Hispanic and Latino population. And so when we talk about making information accessible, we talk about bilingual capabilities of our staff and making sure we hire for that. And also making sure we train everyone on cultural competency so that when we're talking to these communities, we communicate in a way that resonates with them. That's not just Google Translate of an English message into Spanish, but really starts with a message that resonates with the Spanish-speaking population. We also want to understand how our target population communicates. One of the things we've recently discovered is how much the WhatsApp program on mobile phones is used by the Spanish-speaking and especially the migrant farm working population. And so we're currently exploring ways we can work that app into the way we communicate with our populations and deliver services. We also look to use existing services as a way to provide information. So if someone's already coming to us to get food, using that interaction to also do disaster preparedness so that it's not 2 separate programs, but one way that we kind of touch on multiple things at the same time. So it's more efficient, it saves a trip for clients, and we already have their attention, so we're trying to make sure we can emphasize as much as possible. And when we're working to get information out to the community, we found that hands-on activities are really the most impactful. So rather than just sharing with someone, it's great to have backup copies of documentation, which is one of the biggest challenges we find. Actually running workshops when people come in to get food, we also offer them the opportunity to, and we let them know beforehand, we'll make copies for them of their documents and then distribute paper protectors and casings so that they walk away with their copies and with their information protected. We also do installations of Code Red and other emergency alert systems on their phone while they're sitting with us. And then the last big thing I want to touch on is going out into the community to serve families rather than waiting for them to come to us. As I mentioned earlier, transportation is a big issue for a lot of families, especially in the Hispanic and Latino communities. And so we recognize that, and our response has been to set up mobile events where we travel out and meet families where they are, do community events, and really go to them rather than having them come to us. The last thing for people coming to us, we have done drive-through events. COVID-19 spurred that to do something that could serve a lot of people, but also do it safely in COVID guidelines. And so that's something we'll have in our plan going forward, should we need it as well. So that's kind of a quick recap. You can move on to the next slide of how we've planned and our thought process. I know I kind of covered a lot in a short period of time, so I'll be around for the Q&A. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to email or reach out, and we're happy to continue to collaborate and support our partner agencies in any way we can.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Really appreciate that, and glad we're running a little early so that we'll have a chance to include you in the Q&A. That's awesome. Love to turn it over to Pastor Cornelius. Nice to see you.
Thank you for having us, and we appreciate this opportunity to share. Anybody ever seen logos? You attach them one to the other. What I'm seeing in this presentation is every previous presenter has locked on to the vision of the food bank, and we will do no less in locking on with them as well. We are Adelphia Incorporated, founded around about 1999, and we're grateful for this particular opportunity. Next slide. That is me. That is who I am. That is some of my information. Next slide, please. This is a work that was born out of failure. I like to remember a young lady named Hannah, who by her example and many at the food bank worked hard at developing relationships. As a retired Marine, I believe training is constant when I was a Marine. Also, preparation is constant. It's done so by developing relationships in our communities, being reliable, having professionalism, a good product to use. And that is what the food bank has provided for us. Good product, good relationships. Next slide, please. Here you can see some of the programs, some of the things that we have done, even in COVID, before COVID, children that we have worked with, programs that we have developed. Gaining trust, being trustworthy helps in preparing for disaster. As the previous presenter said to us, it's hard to prepare for disaster in the middle of a disaster. We have boots on the ground. We're out in the community. We're developing trust. Some of our volunteers are even learning language so that they can communicate with some of our Hispanic brothers and sisters. This is how to develop those trust areas. I like to call them trust avenues, whereby folk don't mind sharing where they live so that we can deliver to them, who they are, and how we accept them, how we treat them when we do these particular programs that the food bank offers unto us. Next slide, please. How do we establish relationships? Relationships must be built. We have to get to know people. We have relationships with our policing forces, our sheriffs, different pastorals in the area, different community centers in the area. We do not confine ourselves to just Cove City, but we try to make ourselves a living example of what help looks like. We are in a food desert. We're about 15 to 20 miles from any grocery store that we can use. We have fresh fruits and produce that can be gotten to. And when we bring, or when the food bank brings into our community this kind of help, the relationship is built. The smile upon the face upon delivery, the shaking of the hand when we could shake hands, the letting them know that we're there and we're there to support them. It takes time, And I believe, just like you're doing from the previous year of our relationship, even to when the very house that I'm in right now was filled with 4 feet of water, the food bank came and saw about me. As I endeavored to help my area, they endeavored to help me, gave me an opportunity. The New York Times came into this home and interviewed to see that some of the highest areas in my area was up to 8 to 10 feet underwater. You'd be surprised when the flood comes, how these different relationships that are already cultivated stand up to the challenge. So I'm grateful for the example that was set by Hannah. I'm grateful for the example that was set by Mercedes. I'm grateful for the example that's being set by Joetta, that we are in constant communication whereby we can have what I believe is called quick reaction because the relationship is already there. Next slide, please. A plan can be developed to respond to these things, but planning takes time. Constant monitoring of what we've been observing. Exactly what you're doing now. Lessons learned. But even in the environment in which we are in right now, we never know what a storm is going to do and how it's going to shift. I think about 20 years ago, a storm went up the East Coast and we thought it was gone and it came right back down. And we were unprepared. Not so now. The food bank has helped us to be mindful of monitoring, observing on basis. You have to have security. Security and protecting our people, protect who we serve. Even when they protest, there still needs to be some protection for even those who find themselves in the need of food. And then after doing things like this, we must evaluate and then reevaluate our best practices. We have to keep looking like you're looking, pull it apart like you're pulling apart, reevaluate, sometimes just trash what we did in the past and look at what we're doing now that makes people's lives better. Every last one of you who are witnessing this training experience has something that you can contribute to the better practices of the food bank and our community endeavors. I learned from each of you in your presentations. I learned from each of you when you speak of your areas. I learned, I steal from you because some of your ideas are so valuable to making what we do in helping people provide a sense of dignity, support, and class. Next slide, please. How do we prepare for disasters throughout the year? I use the acronym OP, observing of times and seasons, planning, and patience. Next slide, please. Observing of times and seasons. Look at that. We know we can watch the news, but sometimes you can just look at the weather and tell. We've been under the water. We've been blown over for water. Even in my area, boats have been set beside hotels. Some hotels have never recovered. And in the midst of recovering from storms, then we have COVID. In my opinion, you guys are the most authorized people to give an opinion on what we're about to experience. Before this season comes, I believe that what you do, the food bank and the partnerships that we have working together, shifting from one area to another, you know exactly what to do. So you watch the weather, you watch the seasons, you make preparation, and then you come up with follow through. Sometimes in the fall, we have late hurricanes. Sometimes in the fall, we have school closing. It was like, I think the last major storm that we had, Mercedes came to our rescues because when the schools closed, I didn't have to wait for the food bank to develop a relationship with me. I already had a relationship with the food bank and they came to my rescue. They called me and provided lunches on Bryant Chapel's campus so that children who were out of school still had food to eat. So as I said before, preparation is constant. So that implementation in the midst of the storm already has relationship developed so we can execute the plan that we are preparing for. Next slide, please. Political and social scenarios. You can see what happens. You can see what we're going through. You can look at the times. Situations like Black Lives Matter, Asian Lives Matter, church shootings, voting attempts to be limited to ability to vote, immunizations. Every avenue that we are dealing with, somewhere in that circle, we're going to discover people who don't have enough food to eat. Already in place, relationship already developed. We can execute. Next slide, please. How to prepare clients for disasters. Clients are prepared for disaster through information and preparation, Facebook, television, out in the community, boots on the ground, availability of what our facilities are. We're grateful that we're in about 3 to 4 counties, and we're training them to be prepared. We're developing relationships sometimes 20, 30 miles away. So that if I don't have, just yesterday, one site ran out of food. Just yesterday, a site ran out of food, but we had another site. And because the sites are networking together, they can now go to the other site and still provide for the community in which they serve. Relationships developed before the storm helps us to prepare our clients, to tell them that we're going to be there. Consistency in professionalism and good product brings about trust. And for me as a pastor, the church must get to the place where we include our community in our budget. Start strategizing on how we in our community, not for membership's sake, but for the preservation of life. What can we do to partner with our community? Next slide, please. How do we develop our disaster recovery plan? Small groups, both in the church and in the community. Partnerships, both the church and the community. People helping people, pastors helping pastors, churches helping churches, leaders helping leaders. Even when we go through policing agencies or politicians, we've had all types of persons on our campus volunteering. People coming in and seeing that there's a good product with a good support mechanism, good people trying to help other people. We are constantly, when we have the sheriff's department come in and pass, when we have the health department comes in and begin to not only pass out food, but provide COVID shots. All these things help us to prepare for a disaster. Next slide, please. Patience is needed in the following: setting up the facility to accommodate the people. I sometimes believe that churches think that they're mausoleums instead of places of service. So what we try to do is be prepared to use our facilities to support our community. So yes, they may leave some dirt behind. There might be some trash on the floor, but people are more important than buildings. So I believe we need to have patience when it comes down to preparing for disaster. Okay, next slide. By failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. I'd like to add on to Benjamin Franklin's quote: preparing is constant, so we won't fail. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Pastor Cornelius. That was really fantastic information and good reminders of how we can all work together during times of disaster and non-disaster as well. We're going to call an audible and give some time for Q&A now as opposed to after the next presentation. And while we wait to see if folks have questions, please put them in the chat box as opposed to unmuting since we've got such a large group. Feel free to type them in the chat box and we'll read them out. But I did want to offer an opportunity, Erlene, Carter, Daniel, Pastor Cornelius, if there's anything that came up, any additional points that kind of connected together as you were hearing one another speak, feel free to make any of those points now, and we'll ask folks again to put any questions in the chat box and address them.
One thing that comes to mind for me, hearing many similar ideas that I've heard from across the different presenters, is the idea to not try to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of good disaster partners out there. The way we've developed our plan has been a lot of learning from others and inclusion of other disaster plans. What we've seen, it has been a lot of what we've created on our own. So be active in reaching out and asking questions of other groups of what does your plan look like, sharing resources and not just trying to do it alone. Going back to that first topic that I shared about of working with others and the great partner agencies that we have, really tapping into that network of experience here is something valuable and a really good starting place, either if you don't have a plan or a way to improve the current plan that you do have.
Absolutely, that's a great point.
Yeah, I love the points about relationships and setting them up beforehand, because I think the thing we've learned through the last 3 disasters is you get new relationships each time, but if you can keep those relationships up when the disasters hit, then it's that much easier than trying to recreate the wheel or trying to figure out who's doing what in areas where maybe we don't have as much service or get hit harder or whatever. So I think the relationship point was key. I love not handing out business cards during time of disaster, but when the skies are clear, I thought that was a great point. Build your relationships always, right? And then they're there when you need them.
Yeah, I agree. Relationships. You cannot know too many people, and to have the relationships prior to the disaster, that was key. And also, both groups talked about service, is who they're trying to serve. And Pastor Cornelius, I'm going to quote you often. Church is a place of service. You can be open other times than Sunday. A little dirt is okay. So I think that's so important. And Daniel, for me, your comments about working with our Latinx and our farm worker community, recognizing that the last storm, they had no concept of what was going on and were left. And that's one of the areas that we're really trying to work in as well. So thank you for making it, filling that gap. Thank you.
Our presentators, the ones that came before me, I felt like they were holding my hand. And the reason why I said that's so important, all this information that you're giving us is great. But if there's not people who have boots on the ground that know where to go, and then are connected to people who can supply what is needed, we're going to fail. So the presenter before me, Daniel, held my hand. The presenter before him held his hand. And then we became a connect that not only supports where we are, but can support somewhere else as well. So I like the connectivity of the food bank.
Nice.
And we do
Yovita,
have,
I know we have one question in the chat box. Yovita, could you read that out for us, please?
I'll actually read it out for you, Jessica. Carter, this question is for you. From Brendan. Carter, my name is Brendan McGinley. I am the lead cook at Salvation Army in Wilmington, North Carolina. I have a question. I just wanted to, I'm working with the Salvation Army for a couple months now and was wondering if I could meet with someone one-on-one to help prepare for when a disaster does happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we got to learn from other people. We got to learn from each other and people that have gone before us. So yeah, I mean, connect with Aaron might be the easiest way first, or I can put my email in the box. But yeah, let's set up a time to talk, and however we can help for sure. Thanks for what you're doing, cooking with Salvation Army in Wilmington. Hope you're enjoying it, and yeah, let's talk soon.
Great. Well, if folks think of additional questions, we'll have another Q&A session after a couple more presentations. But thank you all so much for talking that through and really putting all of those best practices out there for folks to discuss. We are now going to move into how we can work better together during a disaster. And Larry Morris, our Director of Partner Services, is going to lead us in that conversation. Thanks, Larry.
Hold on one second. I was having some technical difficulties.
Sure.
while Larry's doing that, there was one thing Jessica reminded me I kind of forgot to talk about. I kind of glanced over it. I put it in my first slide, but the last slide, but I didn't. I kind of stopped short because I felt like when I was going through it that I was going to run out of time. But that's the after action, after disaster. And if you can think about even now during pandemic, lessons learned from the pandemic or lessons learned from Florence. If you haven't done that yet, definitely sit down with the folks that were key to that. The work that happened, whether it was during the pandemic or during Florence, and take those lessons learned and tweak your plans or get your plan down on paper, because while each plan is different, you can learn key things from it. Like I said, we forgot one of our branches that we didn't think was impacted. We definitely brought all of our branches in the next time we had a hurricane coming. The first two pandemics, we really learned better how to take care of our staff. And we made a lot of changes this last time for Florence, and then even the pandemic, where the organization did a better job, even with little things, taking care of staff, making things available to staff during the pandemic, just being more thoughtful to even mental health and lunches and things like that seem simple, but that go a long way to kind of making the experience less stressful or less prone to burnout, just putting some of those easy things in place. So if you haven't done an after action on the pandemic, which we haven't done one either on the pandemic yet, because we're still kind of in it, but Florence for sure, if you haven't done one on that, like don't feel like you can't do it now. Do it now so you can learn from it for the next one. So sorry, forgot about that.
For sure. Thanks, Carter. Larry, do we have you back?
I am back.
Hooray.
Yeah, I have my own personal disaster here. My internet went out. I mean, literally, as soon as Pastor Cornelius finished up, my internet petered out on me. I was like, oh no, but I had a backup plan, just like you should for a disaster. Had my iPhone, but when you heard the echo, I was connected on both devices because my internet came back in. So I'm here with you and hopefully won't have any other issues. So good afternoon, everybody. Glad to have all of you here with us today. Looking forward to presenting to you and hopefully sharing some useful information for you all. So I'm going to build on hopefully some of the points that the other presenters made, and really good information already was shared with folks. But again, I want to build upon some of that. And so my presentation is really going to be how we can work better together. And when I say we, I mean the food bank and its partner agencies and other community organizations during a disaster. And it should really read before, during, and after a disaster. Next slide, please. So this will build a little bit upon what Carter was talking about earlier about how we prepare for a disaster, before it may happen. And we're concentrating a lot on hurricanes today because those are the disasters that we really face most often in North Carolina. We've had ice storms as well. We also talked about having the pandemic, et cetera. So there are other disasters, but again, the ones that we really focus on that really affects most of the service territory usually will be hurricanes. So 72 hours before an expected landfall, the food bank's outreach coordinators. So as Pastor Cornelius mentioned, one of those folks is Jovita for the New Bern branch, but each branch has at least one outreach coordinator. The Raleigh branch has two, but they will reach out to our partner agencies just to kind of check in with you via phone. The purpose of the call really is just to check on you all, let you know that we're thinking about you, first of all, because we do care about each one of you and our partner agencies and the entire network. But we want to just inform you also that we are watching the storm. And that we're making preparations and that we've activated our emergency action team by that point as well. We also want to make sure we have the most up-to-date contact information for you, because if we're not able to get in contact with you after a disaster, then we're not going to be able to serve you effectively, and you won't be able to serve the community effectively. So we will try to reinforce that with everybody when we're making those phone calls, and I try to just verify the information with you. Email information as well. And we'll also collect backup contact information from each one of you. If the impact of a storm is expected to be really severe, our food bank might actually pre-stage some items for partner agencies. This is something we learned, from having many disasters, many hurricanes come through our service territory. Sometimes it's difficult to get into places, I believe Carter mentioned earlier, because of flooding, because of down power lines, trees, et cetera. So if we're able to pre-stage some items at some of the disaster relief agencies that are expected to be in the path of the storm, that may help to hasten the disaster relief abilities of those partners to get food out into the community really quickly. And again, we try to learn after each and every single storm, and we try to tweak our disaster plan after each storm. And we do the after action reports, as we mentioned earlier. And then each one of our outreach coordinators also will do, they'll explain the assessment process to you when we're making those calls 72 hours beforehand. But we'll also, let you know how we're going to make assessments and determine how we're going to get product out to you and how those requests will be handled. Next slide, please. So this says here the Director of Partner Services will send the communication. That is me. So I'll be sending communication out to all of our partners at least 72 hours in advance of potential landfall. And during that communication, it'll include information about the food bank's prep for disaster, about closures of our branches, because sometimes we do need to close our branches if they're expected to be in the storm's path. And as I was mentioned earlier, we want to make sure our staff and volunteers and partner agencies and everyone can prepare themselves. So we know that we all need to make sure that everything in our own homes are taken care of. So we do close some of our branches in advance of the storms at some points and batten down the hatches, if you would. We also will share during that communication materials about disaster preparation and just tips on food safety after disaster. Power goes out, sometimes there's flooding. And so we want to give you good information and tips on what you can do to keep the food safe that you're distributing out to the community. And then we'll also send appropriate links out to partner agencies such as readync.org and other links as well. And I printed out some information about readync.org in case you're not familiar with it. There's a website, but there's also an app. And that app can be downloaded from the Apple Store, but also on Google Play for Android devices. And that app provides information such as real-time traffic and weather information, critical information on how to be safe during different hazardous events, real-time information about open shelters for evacuees, including addresses, capacity, directions, and if the shelter is pet-friendly, which is really important. Real-time updates on flood levels of major nearby creeks and rivers. Provides phone numbers and links to all North Carolina power companies to report outages. Also has basic instructions on how to develop emergency plans and what to put in your emergency supply kit. And again, we're talking about preparing for disasters, so it's really vital for individual families and for partner agencies, et cetera, for everybody to have their pre-disaster kit ready. Also provides real-time information on which counties have issued evacuation orders. Contact numbers and links to websites for those who need help recovering from a disaster. And then there's also direct links to readync.org and NCDPS website and social media accounts. There is a lot of information on that ReadyNC app and on the website. So I do encourage you all to download the app now if you don't have it already, and to visit the website to see what resources are available out there. Next slide, please. So this is not one of our outreach coordinators at the food bank, but just a stock photo. But that's kind of what we look like when we're making those calls out to partner agencies to do assessments. So the outreach coordinators will contact partner agencies in the affected areas to conduct a damage assessment, during the first 24 hours after a disaster. We may have contacted you. I know we do the 72 hours before disaster. We may even contact you 24 hours before expected landfall. We just want to make sure we're keeping in constant contact with you, but definitely immediately after a disaster strikes, we're going to be contacting you to let you know, again, just to check on you, to make sure that that you're doing okay, hopefully, and then to assess what needs you have. And so next slide, please. So during the call, there are several things we'll be asking you. We'll ask detailed questions of the partner agency, including, was your agency directly impacted by the storm? Because if so, your agency might be offline. You might not be able to provide assistance to folks. So we do want to make sure which agencies we have available and which ones are not. We also ask you, were your staff or volunteers impacted? Because again, that may affect your ability to serve the community and your ability to accept product from the food bank at that time. You are our eyes and ears as well. Even though we have ReadyNC and other resources, you are our eyes and ears on the ground as well. So we may ask you about road conditions in your area, whether you've seen flooding, whether there's power outages, et cetera, because again, you're right there in the communities, so you know what's going on maybe before some of the other resources may. And we've had situations before where our truck drivers got out into communities and were detoured. They were rerouted because there was flooding on the roads. There were trees across, power lines down, et cetera. So if we can get that intel beforehand, it's really helpful. And then we also ask you, of course, for your immediate needs to see if there's anything that we can do in the short term, but also some expected needs your partner agency may have. All right, next slide, please. So our outreach coordinator will contact partner agencies, and we'll use a disaster relief product request form when we're doing our actual agency needs assessment. And this will assess the needs for food and non-food items. And the form, this is the printout of the form. You can't see it because of my background, but anyhow, we have an electronic version of the form that we use, technology too. But on this form, we ask you just questions that'll let us know how we can best serve you. So we'll record the person taking the request, so that'll be our staff member that'll do that, the date that we're talking to you, and then we'll record the requested delivery date for the items. And usually it's 1 to 2 days out from the time we take that order from you. We'll get the agency name, your food bank ID number as well. And then we also will ask, whether your agency is able to pick up from the branch or whether it needs a delivery of the product. We'll confirm the delivery address, and sometimes the delivery address may not be your regular agency address, so we do want to confirm that information with you. We'll confirm, who the contact person is for the particular delivery, and with your phone number and alternate phone. We'll try to confirm a secondary contact in case you're not available for some reason. We want to make sure we can get in touch with you all. And we do want to get an idea of roughly how many individuals you expect to assist, because it'll help us when we are building the orders for your agency. And then we'll ask, do you think that there's a security risk or not, as Pastor Cornelius had talked about earlier. And we do recommend, if there is a security risk or just a general practice, if you can, especially for these large distributions, to have law enforcement available, if at all possible, just to kind of keep the order. People don't come out, with the intention of trying to cause any trouble or anything. But, when you're under duress and under stress, you may have lost your home, or someone may be injured, or people really get stressed out, and tempers may flare. So it's good to have that law enforcement presence there just to kind of keep things calm and under control. We do ask exactly what type of items that you could use. And we have several categories of items that we have on this sheet. So beverages, frozen items. We do have some agencies that do prepare meals after disasters. Non-food items, so that could be cleaning supplies or personal care products, refrigerated products, condiments, assorted food items. That could be pretty much anything and everything you can imagine. And those are normally going to be dry items, produce, and then snack items. We can't guarantee what we're going to send out to you, but we try to do the very best we can to make sure that the product you receive is what you requested. So that's the form in general. When we send that form, the outreach coordinators will send that to our operations team so that they can build those orders for you all. And it's worked very well. This is something that we learned, I think, after Hurricane Matthew, and we did one of our after action assessments. And we want to always constantly improve how we're doing disaster relief and recovery and providing that product. So a suggestion was having a formal document instead of just shooting emails to people that had all the pertinent information about the partner agency, what the needs were, so we could get the product out to as quickly as possible. We do, agencies may pick up product from the food bank or receive delivery if available. If at all possible, we do ask agencies to pick up from the food bank because we don't have unlimited resources, even though we have extra trucking usually after a disaster. We have temp drivers sometimes, or drivers from other food banks. We might be able to rent trucks, et cetera. But if agencies are able to make it to the food bank, we do request that you do so if at all possible. Items requested, again, aren't guaranteed, but we will do the very best we can to fulfill your order. And as Carter mentioned earlier, we have staged some product already, which we haven't done in some previous disasters. So we do have product available here to meet the immediate need right after a disaster. And then as the community comes online and starts donating product, we get product from through the Feeding America network, through other food banks. We hopefully will be able to fulfill needs in a quick and timely manner. DR product is typically going to be complimentary to you all. The last thing we ever need to do is charge people any kind of shared maintenance fees. after a disaster, and typically we'll make everything complimentary if it's declared a federal disaster area. And then primary disaster relief partners, of course, you all on this call today have first priority. Doesn't mean that we won't serve other partner agencies, but you all do have first priority since you have agreed with the food bank to be our primary disaster relief partners. So we're going to look to you first and provide the product to you before other agencies. So I'm going to transition to the next slide here to talk a little bit about, I don't want to repeat some things that Carter said, but we do have the emergency action team that is activated, before a disaster. So pretty much 72 hours out, we're going to activate that team and just make some plans and just communicate with each other and remind everybody what the disaster plan says and remind people of their roles and responsibilities in that. And just make sure that we're preparing properly as a food bank, making sure generators are where they need to be, making sure, as Carter mentioned, that our trucks are fueled up, reminding people to take care of themselves and the volunteers and the partner agencies, reminding the outreach coordinators that, they need to make those telephone calls to you all. And then our emergency action team will meet on a regular basis, right before the storm and then after a storm once it hits. And these meetings are literally immediately in the aftermath of a disaster are going to be every day. And as we kind of get further along into disaster relief and recovery, the frequency of those meetings will decrease. During the emergency action team meetings after a disaster, our outreach coordinators will report information that they've gathered from you all and talking about your needs, talking about how many folks that you're serving. If there's any intel that they've gathered from you about road closures, as I mentioned earlier, power outages, et cetera, they'll pass that along. And that just helps us in our disaster response and making sure we can get the necessary resources out to you all. And then again, the emergency action team will meet until it's determined basically that the food banks return to mostly normal operations due to a decreased community needs for supplies. But that will go on for months, typically, especially when after a major disaster like a Matthew or Floyd, if some of you all remember that way back in '99, or Florence. Next slide, please. This is my last slide coming up. Oh, no, it's not. I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. So what can partner agencies do to ensure the best possible service? So if possible, again, pick up from your food bank branch. If you're not able to do that, then we will most certainly make every effort to deliver out to your agency in a timely manner. And again, understanding that all product requested may not be available, excuse me, so just exercise some patience with us. We're going to do the best we can to serve you as well as we can. When receiving deliveries, we think about safety. We want to make sure that you're safe, your volunteers and staff are safe, the clients that are receiving services from you are safe as well as our drivers. So if our truck is delivering to you, please make sure there's a clear path for them to get in and that there's a paved area for them to drop off at as well. So just make sure that any volunteers, staff, individuals that are receiving food are well away from the truck and don't rush the truck or anything like that, because again, we just don't want anybody to get hurt and we don't want there to be any kind of incidents or anything with tempers flaring, et cetera. And please do inform your outreach coordinator as well if there are any questions or concerns that you have. They're going to be your key liaison between your agency and the food bank. So please utilize that resource. Now I think I'm on my last slide. So self-care. You all, we hope that you just have plans in place so that your agency, staff, and volunteers are able to take care of any personal losses related to the disaster. We did have staff who were affected after both Matthew and Florence. And we gave those staff the space to take care of what they needed to at home before asking them to do anything related to work and serving the partner agencies, et cetera. So please do make sure you give your staff and volunteers the space to do the same. Ensure that your agency is able to rotate folks to avoid burnout. I remember after Hurricane Floyd, I think we were working literally like 13-hour days as food bank staff. And we had a lot less staff back then, so it was harder to rotate people in and out. But we did try to give people a break from time to time, and we especially did that after Hurricane Florence. So please do try to rotate folks the best that you can, just so people don't really burn out, because it is a really intense time, as you all know that have dealt with this before. Take advantage also of mental health services that may be available. Again, it's a very stressful time for everybody. Sometimes it may not be your own trauma, but working with other people's trauma can be draining and taxing on folks. So if you do need someone to talk to, please don't be shy, don't be ashamed or anything. Please do take care of yourself, take care of your mental health. And remember this last point, you are not going to be any good to anybody if you're not able to take care of yourself. So please do make sure that you're practicing self-care, and relaxing and taking the time off that you need. And again, just making sure that you're taking care of your mental and physical health. That is all that I have. So I will turn it back over to Jessica.
Thank you, Larry. That was awesome. And some really great reminders there at the end. Emergency management at the state level has a specific task force for mental health and wellness. And I know Pastor Cornelius touched on that a little bit too, especially thinking about children in times of disaster. So there are those resources out there. And I think really good opportunities to connect folks with organizations that are addressing that element of care and service during a disaster. So appreciate it. If folks have questions for Larry, feel free to type those in the chat box. And after our next presentation, we'll have another round of Q&A. And now I want to introduce Gary Sitz, who is with FEMA, and we're running a little bit early, so I appreciate your joining early, Gary. Gary is an emergency management program specialist with Region 6 in FEMA, with a focus in mass care and emergency assistance. So thank you so much, Gary, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Oh, it's certainly my pleasure. First of all, it's sites, but no problem.
Very
yes,
sorry, I should have asked. Thank you.
no problem. Okay, I just wanted to show my face real quick, just so you know I'm a real person, not a robot, but I probably won't keep the thing on because I don't want to see you scratching my face or pick my nose, whatever. Anyway, I am grateful to Feeding America, my partner Patrick Crawford, for inviting me down here to connect with you guys, and I'm very humbled by the invite to come and to speak to you. So first of all, the first question may be, what's FEMA Region 6? So FEMA Region 6 is, I'm down here based out of Denton, Texas, which is in the Dallas area, and this region we serve the states of Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and New Mexico. So your second question may be, what is a guy from the Southwest doing, giving a presentation at a training in North Carolina? The basic reason is I have a long history with working with Feeding America and the food banks. I participated in at least 8 major disaster declarations, and all supporting feeding or mass care operations. So I've built up a good, wonderful relationship with Feeding America and the food banks and all the different disasters that I've participated in. So I've grown to have a very strong appreciation for the incredible work that the food banks do and you partner agencies, the role that you all play not only in day-to-day feeding, but also in disaster feeding. Probably the most significant contribution to disaster response and feeding of any agency that's out there. So just know that I and we in FEMA, we recognize that. So, okay, enough of looking at Gary. Okay, so as I said, I participated in 8 major disasters. Every single one, I had a very close interaction and relationship working with the food banks. And just a quick comment on some of the earlier presentations, Carter and Larry. I was struck by everything that you guys were talking about. It's pretty much what we do in FEMA, similar types of things. Of course, the things you all do and plan for it are probably more of a tactical level, but everything you went through are similar types of things that we do. And also a comment on Reverend Cornelius. First of all, thank you for your service. But what you said about relationships, spot on, because it's all about building relationships so you can build that trust and confidence in each other. So when you go into the heat of a disaster, you know what you're doing. Okay, so let me start off in the macro. I don't want to assume people know this. If there's a disaster, of course, FEMA don't just roll in. You know, we again, you may or may not know this, but if a disaster strikes, FEMA does not arrive until formally requested by the governor. in the form of an emergency declaration or a major disaster declaration, that's approved by the presidents. So if that is done, major disaster deck, that's signed by the president, that's when FEMA rolls in. Now, we may roll in for planning purposes a little earlier than that, but then that's when we roll in earnest. And from my side of the thing, as a mass care specialist, the mass care support can be provided under the law, under the Stafford Act, which is the law that authorizes and funds the disaster response. We can provide a multitude of services and resources for sheltering, feeding, distribution of emergency supplies, and things like that. If there is a major disaster with individual assistance, or IA, in the declaration, that enables an additional types of stuff. So if you just have a major disaster deck or even an emergency deck, we can provide sheltering and feeding resources and support. But there's got to be an individual assistance or an IA declaration in order for additional FEMA assistance to come about, like a CNA, continued need assistance, which is like $500 to each person just for emergency food, for rental assistance, for housing assistance, and more close to home, what you guys do, you have to have IA or individual assistance in that declaration in order to authorize DSNAP or disaster SNAP. Okay, so I just wanted to start off with that, just so everybody had a common understanding. Okay, so this is just, I'm just going to talk from a macro or a high point standpoint of what FEMA support to disaster feeding looks like. First of all, again, FEMA rolls in, but we don't roll in and just start talking to the food banks or talking to the partners. Everything we do is in full coordination with the state. Okay, I don't do anything. Again, I've been on 8 major disasters, 8 different places, and the first thing I do is I go straight to the state mass care lead and saying, what do you need? What can I do? Who do I talk to? Of course, ideally, at least in my region, 6 states, I already have those relationships built. They know what I can and can't do, and I've already built the relationships with the state, with the Red Cross, with the Salvation Army, with the state VOADs, and all those things. But if not, like I did come up and participate in the response during Hurricane Florence, and the first thing I did, I was directed to the folks. Yeah, again, I mainly participated in the sheltering issue, but I did dabble in the feeding area. I think the food bank I spoke to Mike Darrow. I don't know. Is he still with the food bank?
He is. He's the head of our 2-state food bank association, Feeding the Carolinas.
All right. Well, he may or may not remember me, but he's a person I dealt with. But anyway, so we're going to roll in. We're going to be working under the guise of the Feeding Task Force to provide whatever support that the states needs. And ultimately, one of the biggest things I do, like the Feeding Task Force, they're going to be looking at feeding today, tomorrow, and the next day. So that's what the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, the food banks, that's what they're doing, and they're planning for the first 3 days. What I hope to do in a disaster is to look beyond that horizon. Look at 4 days, 7 days, 2 weeks from now. What are the feeding needs going to be? And the people that I rely on for that data are the folks at the food banks, because you all, as I'm speaking to the choir here, but you all know, as you've said, you're the boots on the ground. You know the population, you know the demographics, you know the food deserts, you know the cultural dietary needs. So most all that information I'm going to get from the food bank network of partner agencies. So that's why, again, it's critical that we in FEMA always recognize and build those relationships with the food banks. So that's what we do from a Feeding Task Force standpoint. Again, we look beyond the horizon, what's going to be needed. So FEMA shelf-stable meals, what's that? Just FYI, FEMA maintains an inventory of over 10 million shelf-stable meals across the country on any given day. And that's to plan for potential catastrophic events like a Cat 5 that may hit Miami. There are a couple of major, seismic zones and tectonic plate areas where it's anticipated there's going to be major earthquakes. One in the Midwest, up in the Northwest, and of course we all know about the California and the San Francisco area. If something like that happens, we're going to need millions and millions of meals right away. So we maintain that inventory on any given day. In any given disaster, if there's a need by the food banks or by the disaster for these shelf-stable meals, we can provide them in very short order, usually within 72 hours to 7 days, depends upon the amount and things like that. So that FEMA has that capability. Food commodity procurement. If the need arises, we can also procure food commodities. And on other disasters, in coordination again with the feeding task force and the food banks, we have procured mega amounts of food boxes. And these food boxes contained basically the standard Feeding America food box that you are I'm sure are very familiar with. That's the types of commodities we would typically procure. Shelf-stable foods that could be put in the food box. And I'll touch on that in the next slide very briefly too. And so this bullet, the IA support contract, that is just an overarching mega contract that FEMA has that we can activate and that allows us to ramp up and shelter over 200,000 people, and ultimately, after a ramp up, provide over 500,000 meals per day. Again, that's just a major contract that can't be invoked if it's a catastrophic, usually multi-state disaster. Okay, that last bullet that's kind of separated on the slide, the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, or EFSP, I put that on there and talking with Jessica a couple weeks ago, just to throw out there that EFSP is a non-disaster feeding support program that FEMA manages in coordination with other key partners like the Red Cross, Catholic Charities, and others to provide food and or provide funding for agencies that are supporting homelessness, the underserved, and now in these days even the refugee and the migrant populations. I believe Jessica's either has or will provide additional information about those programs and a resource guide you're putting together.
Yes, that's correct. That will go out after the meeting.
Okay. Right. So that's all I'll say about that, and you can look at that information if you choose to. Okay, next slide. Okay, of course I had to throw a slide in here to make your head hurt. There's a lot of information on the slide, but the only point I want to make is that what we do, one of the things we do is, as I said, we're looking at beyond the horizon, the immediate disaster feeding operations to try to ascertain what additional food is going to be needed if we anticipate a protracted disaster demand, feeding demand. So what you're looking at the slide in a nutshell is at the very bottom in the blue along each of those hash marks, that represents the regular day-to-day blue sky feeding levels by the food bank. And this slide actually I did this slide last year in support of the Louisiana disasters and
We may have lost you, Gary. Are you still there? Gary, do we still have you? Net, I saw you had joined from Region 6. I'm not sure if you're close to Gary or with him, or if you're able to jump in, or we can move ahead to a little bit of Q&A. We wait for, oh, it looks like Gary has left. Maybe he'll reach.
Hi, this is Ned. I'm so sorry. I'm actually mobile right now.
Oh, no problem.
I'm not able to jump in. I would normally do it, but probably.
No problem. Thank you so much.
If possible, could we give him another? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that he did leave the meeting, so he may be able to rejoin shortly. He might be having some technical difficulties. While we wait to see if Gary's able to rejoin, Lakeisha just reminded folks that if you have any questions for Larry or really any of our presenters so far, feel free to type them in the chat and we'll be able to get to them in another Q&A session after this presentation.
Hey, Jessica, this is Net Davis again.
Hey.
Gary did let me know that his computer is coming back up, so he should be back on in about another 2 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Sorry about that.
No problem. It happens to all of us.
Jessica, is now the time that I should play my music?
We could use some Earth, Wind, and Fire. Yes, Arlene. Spice things up a little bit.
It's been a great session. I hope that people taking notes and thinking of ideas, have questions. It's been a real great opportunity to hear from some different people and their experiences.
Absolutely, really enjoyed the collaboration. So many great ideas and levels of expertise given the number of storms North Carolina has seen over the years. It's a good opportunity for some water and a snack, maybe post-lunch snack. Thank you all for your patience. We want to be able to keep going in this presentation before kind of jumping ahead.
Hey, I'm back.
Welcome back, Gary. So sorry about your computer troubles.
Wow, yeah, it's never happened to me before. It just says your system's having problems. It's going to shut you down now. It did.
Of course. Thanks for rejoining.
Okay. Did everybody copy everything I said so far? I know it's crazy. Anyway, I was on the slide. I just wanted to show you when we talk about disaster food procurement. What I'm talking about is that we can't just say, "Yep, the food bank says they need a bunch of food, so we can go buy it." No, we have to establish the disaster trends. So if you look at the blue sky feeding levels at the bottom, look at the disaster feeding. That dotted line is the historic disaster feeding demand curve. That every disaster since who knows when, that's the pattern that's established. However, some disasters, because infrastructure is so demolished or for whatever reasons, there's still a protracted feeding demand. If we can establish this, and I do this in coordination with the food banks, like I did in Louisiana last year. They said because of COVID, because of the infrastructure power outages and all these things, we're burning through food quicker than we can get it in. So we justified a significant food procurement for the feeding Louisiana, and we did that. So we do that again. The food bank will be working with you, separate agencies, to get this information and to get this forecast that enables us to establish the justification. So again, there's a lot of other information on that. You can ponder that whenever you see the slides. Okay, so the next couple slides, next one, at Jessica's request, I just threw in some information here about the importance of the flood insurance program and what you can do as individuals or individual agencies to help prepare for and to mitigate the impacts of a disaster. And again, you guys may know this stuff already, but I provided, when you get the slides, the links are embedded in the slide. You can click on these things and you can provide some amazing information. Like what I show on the slide here, there's a cost of flooding tool to where you can go to this link and you can raise and lower the little number down there. It says with 1 inch of flood water in a home or a business, it translates to over $25,000. And I showed the other screenshot there. If you have 3 feet of water, you're talking about almost $100,000 of damage. So you can slide that up to 4, 5, 10 feet of water and see what the potential cost is. So the importance of that is you can show the individuals that either or your volunteers, they can look at this, they can use this tool to see what the potential damages is in a flood and what it's going to cost to repair and to recover. Next slide. Okay, to highlight the importance of that, there's just some snapshots of what the cost or what the flood insurance under the FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program that people can get. But this is what flood insurance paid out on three different disasters as compared to what FEMA paid out under the IA programs for disaster assistance. 3 years ago in 2017, DR 4332, that was Hurricane Harvey. Flood insurance paid $118,000. The average cost of the amount that FEMA paid was $4,400. Big difference. Similar contrast in Imelda in 2019, and then in one particular disaster in Texas, there was not enough, I guess, damages across the states and counties to justify a major disaster declaration, so there was no FEMA money provided. However, those that had insurance received ample compensation. So again, I show this just to highlight the critical importance for you and the volunteers and the people that you serve. Again, just to make this point with them about the importance of getting that flood insurance if they can. Okay, next slide. Just a couple additional resources also for you to talk about the importance or things that you can do within your agency or advise your clients or the customers that you serve on things you can do to help improve or mitigate the risk from floodings. Things like elevating your utilities, freeboarding, which is elevating above the anticipated flood height. Things like this, again, if people are able to do these things, these are smart things to do to significantly minimize your potential damages. Again, if you go to those links that are embedded in the slide, provides a lot more information that can be helpful that you can distribute to your customers. Next slide. And just again, some more resource information. I would direct you to things that you can do or to protect your equipment and inventory in your respective agencies. There's a technical bulletin that, again, there's the embedded link that guides you that what you can do to flood-proof your facilities and some of the requirements that you would have to meet to obtain flood insurance coverage based on what type of flood zone that you're in. Again, I'm not a mitigation expert, so I can't talk to the details. But again, at least I can do is provide you with the resource information and the links that you can go to look it up on your own. And I'll close with just I guess the adage that we echo constantly here at FEMA is preparing is having what you need. Mitigation is putting it into action. So that's what we encourage everybody to do. And that's my last slide. And I'm happy to join in the Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gary. And sorry for the added stress of technical difficulties there, but the information that you shared was really valuable. And we will, in addition to the recording of this session, we'll also be sending out the actual PowerPoint, so folks will have access to those really great links that you shared. Appreciate it. I wanted to give an opportunity, since I don't think we saw some additional questions in the chat box. We're going to give it a try to have folks unmute. So if you do have a question for Larry or for Gary, or a comment on what you've seen so far, feel free to click that little microphone icon in the Teams app and unmute yourself, and we will hopefully not have 70 people talking over each other, but did want to give an opportunity for folks to ask questions. Got a quiet group. Larry or Gary, anything additional kind of as you all were talking and listening to one another's presentations that came to mind while we wait and see if folks have some questions for you?
I just wanted to say thank you, Patricia, for pointing out that the Ready NC app is no longer available. I was not aware of that, but that website is pretty comprehensive. So if you do go to the website, it has all the information that I mentioned earlier on it.
Yeah, along those lines, if FEMA or people haven't, you can download the FEMA app, and it also has you can gain access to shelter information, feeding information, and I know Red Cross has a very, very robust app that you can download that has a lot of that information as well.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Gary. One question that we had kind of thought about before y'all's presentation was just wondering how partners can establish relationships with FEMA when FEMA is in their service area once that emergency declaration has been made. Are there any best practices or guidance that you have, Gary, in that respect?
Probably the easiest thing, of course, at our level, working with you all, you'll connect with a FEMA person that's deployed. And you may know this, but this is a FEMA Region 4 area. The person you'll be speaking to is a guy named Lewis Caro, probably.
Yeah.
But otherwise, just for everybody else, people impacted by the disaster, as you may know, there are disaster recovery centers, DRCs, that are set up. That's the key place to go. Early on in disaster, FEMA will have teams canvassing the impacted area. They're called disaster response assistance teams. They go out to help people register. The key thing, absolutely key thing, is for people to either get registered, either online, using the app, at a DRC, or wherever. Get yourself registered. That's the absolute critical first step. And there's again, there's plenty of ways. If you have in your areas that sizable Hispanic or Latina population, there's ways. If people are undocumented or they're afraid to deal with the feds, we deal with that every disaster, and it's understandable. There are ways that we can get them assistance, actually by registering their child, and the family can get assistance through the child's Social Security number and things like that.
That's really helpful information to have. Thank you. Yeah, I've worked with Lewis out of the EOC here in North Carolina, and he has been a great coordination partner with all the other VOAD folks as well. So Lewis is great. Thanks for reminding me what region we're in. Larry, can you kind of share a little bit about the qualifications for a partner agency to become a DR partner? I know all the folks on this call are, but we could have some relationships where other partner agencies are wondering about kind of that process.
Yeah, what we look at, we want to make sure we have at least, one primary disaster partner in each one of the counties. Usually we want to have multiple, but there are certain counties that we just don't have a lot of partner agencies in, like Pamlico County, for instance. But we do want to have adequate coverage. But we look at agencies that have, good storage capacity, a lot of volunteer support, agencies that report well to the food bank and that are in compliance with food bank rules, regulations, and ones that are just engaged with us, that are easy to contact, and that will come to the talking council meetings or now listen and learn sessions that we have. So you just want to make sure the agencies are really highly engaged, because those folks are probably going to be the ones that will do the best job at getting product out and disaster relief supplies out into the community. But when we're looking at agencies to deliver to, we're looking at their physical site as well. Do they have a place that is paved, that's large enough for one of our trucks to get into and drop off to safely? No overhanging power lines or anything like that. So just a lot of just different factors go into determining whether or not an agency might be suitable. And they have to have a commitment and willingness to do this work for the long haul, because as you all know, disaster relief isn't just something that happens for like a couple of weeks after a hurricane comes through or a major disaster. It's going to be a month-long process usually. So the agencies do need to realize if they want to become a primary disaster relief partner, that they're going to be in it for the long haul, just as the food bank is.
Thanks, Larry. That's a great reminder. Do you want to give an opportunity if folks have questions, if you want to unmute and ask Larry and Gary anything that might be on your mind? All right, y'all were so good. All the questions have been answered. There will be opportunities if you have questions that come up after kind of taking a look at the presentation and the PowerPoints, be able to ask your outreach coordinator and get some good connections here to get them answered. At this point, I wanted to turn it over to Erin Courtney, who is our outreach coordinator out of the Wilmington branch, to talk a little bit about the resource guide that will be provided after the fact.
Thanks, Jessica. My name is Erin, and I serve as Outreach Coordinator for the Wilmington branch. And I had the privilege of working on the committee that put together today's training. And one of the items that we wanted to provide at the conclusion was a resource guide. So I have some things to share with you about it. So once you do receive our email follow-up, there's some additional information that you have. The first one is that the intent of the guide is to provide partner agencies with further support. In addition to what's covered in the training, the goal of the guide is to provide that support to you, to staff, volunteers, and as well as the individuals that you serve. Secondly, this guide is not exhaustive. There is a sea of information and resources when it comes to disaster response and preparedness. So there's definitely going to be things that have been left off the guide, but our goal was to provide you as much support as possible. And then lastly, there may be things on the guide that you have already been intimately aware of, such as the long-term recovery groups or VOADs in your area. So those are some disclaimers that, again, our intent is to provide you further support after the training, that the guide is not exhaustive, and that there may be things on the guide that you already are seeing in the chat, from the Red Cross to Ready NC. The guide is organized into 4 sections, and we'll go through each one of those sections, and I'll pull out some quick little summaries. And then lastly, you may say to yourself, oh, Erin, like I don't want to take, screenshots of this. You will get a copy of the guide in an email. We are then working to have the guide posted onto FoodLink. If you're anything like me, my email box gets pretty packed pretty quick. And so that email will get further and further down on the inbox. So our ultimate goal is to put it on FoodLink so it will live there so you can access it when you need it. So we'll move on to the next slide and talk about the first section. The first section is resources from national organizations. So those are our FEMAs, our Red Crosses, Department of Health and Human Services. And so one of the first things I want to draw your attention to is that FEMA does offer to mail you free print material of information that are both for you as an organization as well as for individuals you serve. They can be available in multiple languages. There's also information here about training that can be provided. So if you are bitten by the disaster management bug today and you would like to know more and have more training, there are some resources here at the national level. Also, we talked about self-care. That was a trend throughout, I think, the whole presentation. And Jovita also had posted into the chat website, and that's also featured here, which is a place that you can go to get a fact sheet and publication to help your volunteers and workers cope with stress and trauma during times of disaster. And then lastly, we talk about the blue sky days, and it's a good chance for us to do exercises. And so there's a couple resources included here about how to implement and conduct exercises. So we'll move on to the next slide. So we're done with sort of national resources, and then we're moving on to local and state resources. Also sort of organized the same, that there are training opportunities. North Carolina has the training exercise response management system, also known as TERMS, that provides a calendar of upcoming trainings that cover a variety of topics. There's also information about how you can connect with North Carolina VOADs in your area. There's another network that is specifically meeting to serve under-resourced and marginalized communities. And on that link, you can go and see their calendars and how to join, and there's no cost to join that network. There's the Ready NC website. There's also the North Carolina Commission on Volunteerism and Community Service. When you click that link, it connects you to a YouTube where they have different trainings about, oh my gosh, lots of good trainings there. Local emergency management, this is not a link. Disclaimer, it's not a link. This is just us explaining our encouragement, if you haven't already, to connect with your local emergency management. Some of you already have outstanding, deep relationships with them. And as I believe that was Daniel had shared, let's trade business cards during these blue sky days. And so if you haven't already connected with your local emergency management, we encourage you to do so. They also can be a resource for your customers. Some emergency managements have, these lists where people who have special, needs are during times of disaster. Got ahead of myself. That they could be added to this list so that their needs are registered with local emergency management. So if there is a disaster or an evacuation, they're on the list to be connected with. Lastly, there is a document that will be included separately that is specific for partner agencies who are picking up from our retail donors. This document goes over safety guidelines as well as communication strategies when thinking about we have a disaster coming or we have a hurricane coming, what to do if you're picking up from a retail donation store. And again, that's attached as a separate document. Let's move on to the next slide. And so this is specifically geared towards people who you serve, both preparedness as well as response. And this is where I got a little ahead of myself when the third one, where it says readiness guidance for individuals with disabilities. So there is that little blurb there again about the vulnerable needs list or the special needs registry. Throughout emergency management, they can call that list different things. But there's information here about food safety, youth preparedness. There's also preparedness for individuals who predominantly speak Spanish. There's a place where you can sign up for emergency alerts. Daniel mentioned how they, some of their activities they like to do right there on site and sign people up for Code Red, which is an alert system, but not all of the counties use Code Red. So if you click that link, you can see what alert system is used in your county and then how to sign up for it. There's also the Hope for NC hotline, which is also for individuals, both who you serve as well as your staff and volunteers. Crisis Cleanup is a resource to connect with volunteers to be able to help with a project that's not has a special skill that's required. And then lastly, we talked a little bit about flooding, and there is also a tool for us to know our zone in the event we have to evacuate. There are 5 different zones depending on the risk. And so it's a great thing to have for us to know, as well as the people that we serve, what zone you're in. Lastly, the 4th section is about communication. And communication is really great to touch on in the event that it's things that we can do during blue sky days. And one of the first resources we put together is Canva, which is a website that you can design basic logos, brochures, flyers, and that you can have to post on social media. So if you want to go ahead and already put together an announcement about, we have activated, there's a storm coming, here are some of the things we do, you can use Canva to design that. There are 3 different accesses to it. The first tier is free. There's also a social media toolkit and outreach materials where you can download images, both in English and Spanish, that help with preparedness and response. And then lastly, this is another document that the food bank created that provides communication strategy and timeline pre and post disaster of what things should you be communicating at what time. And that too will be attached as a separate document to the overall resource guide. So I thank you for your time for me to describe that to you. I'm hopeful that when you do receive that email that includes the guide and the other attachments, it just makes it easier for you to pick up and use it, because that is our intent.
Thank you, Erin. Appreciate that. It looks incredibly thorough. A lot of information and good resources there. Gary, I think you're still on. We had a question come in that I wanted to point your direction. Is there anything additional that would be helpful for our partners to know about the individual assistance process with FEMA?
Yes, I'm still on. Well, other than generally, it starts with you registering for disaster assistance, each individual. When that's done, based on where the person's damaged dwelling is, of course, it's assumed that they're in a disaster, a county that's declared for individual assistance. But once the person's identity and occupancy is verified, and that's usually done, FEMA looks into the various national and state data sources to verify that. If they can't verify the identity or occupancy from that data search, and that probably represents about 75% success rate. For the 25% or so that they don't, they will have to provide some sort of documentation that to prove their occupancy and or ownership, whether they're a renter or an owner. And that could be anything from a utility bill to a electric or a lease, certainly, or things, or a deed or whatever. Anything that shows that you were at that address at the time of the disaster. So once that's done, then you'll be contacted by an inspector. And these days, since last year with COVID, most all inspections are done virtual. So that's why it's critically important. Of course, when they register, they have their proper contact phone numbers on the registration. They'll be contacted by the inspector, and they'll do a virtual inspection. If the person's at their dwelling, they can give a descriptive account of the damages. Even better, they can upload some pictures. There's that ability to show, the flood levels or roof that's off, torn off, whatever, all those sorts of things. Based on the inspection, again, there's a group in the FEMA atmosphere that, based on the all kinds of criteria that's been established, they will render an award based on the damages and the outcomes from the inspections. In addition to that, I mentioned a FEMA program earlier. It's called CNA, Critical Needs Assistance. If that is approved, requested by the state and approved, everybody gets that regardless. If your dwelling and your address is in the impacted area, but also if the person is displaced and the home is determined by the inspection not habitable, or if the utilities are out and that don't need an inspection, people are automatically granted rental assistance, which is usually 1 month, or in some cases, based on the circumstances, 2 months of rent based on the fair market rate established by HUD. So that's the general what happens early on in a disaster. And oftentimes people don't agree with the amount of FEMA assistance that was granted, and that's understandable. So we always encourage people that there's always an appeal. You should always appeal, and the more justification, the more documentation you can secure to justify whatever difference is, that will help. Oh, I didn't mention this up front. There is a sequence of delivery that we go through. The first step is of any disaster, of course, the NGOs or the VOAD community responds and provides support. The next step is insurance. People or FEMA does not pay out any monies to a person until insurance pays. So it's important that you, of course, you maintain your insurance documentation. Right away, contact your insurance company. And in order for FEMA to pay assistance, we either have to have a payment statement of what they're going to cover, or a declination statement saying the insurance are not going to pay. Then FEMA will provide assistance. I hope that answers the question.
It does. Thank you. That was really helpful information. Appreciate it. We are running a little bit ahead, so I did want to give one more opportunity for any of our presenters who had any additional thoughts, or anyone who has questions that they didn't want to put in the chat box but would like to unmute and ask our presenters. Feel free. All right, well, one more thing before we go, which hopefully will be exciting. We are going to put together a survey, again, as kind of we mentioned in the beginning of this, how valuable y'all's feedback is to putting together these sessions and making sure that we include information that is helpful and not just kind of repetitive and in one ear and out the other. So you're going to receive an email tomorrow. The link is from SurveyMonkey. It's about 7 questions. Agencies that complete the survey will be entered into a raffle for a chance to win a $30 gift card. Agencies can only win once, but we have 10 winners available for those who fill out and complete the survey. We'll need your agency ID and name and contact information, but that'll all come in an email with some additional information. We're really looking forward to that feedback. Again, it really does help make sure that these types of trainings are topical and helpful, and not just you all sitting on a computer for 2.5 hours. So please take a moment to fill it out. Hopefully the gift card raffle is exciting and provides a little bit of extra incentive, but we'd really appreciate the feedback and make sure that we can pull something great together for next year as well. I want to thank you all so much for taking the time, all of our presenters, all the valuable information that was really given out to make sure that we're ready this year if and when a natural disaster hits. Hopefully it doesn't, but I think we are really in a good place with partnerships and collaboration to be able to help as many people as possible and make sure that the resources are reaching the right people at the right time. So thank you so much again for the time, for all you do in your own communities during blue skies and during times of storm. We really appreciate it and hope that you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you all so much.
Jessica, we do have one more question.
Oh, good. Yes.
If possible.
Yeah.
Someone emailed me. They asked, has North Carolina and FEMA resolved all the issues in Eastern North Carolina with those affected by past hurricanes? They specifically mentioned Hurricane Matthew. If Mr. Gary could speak to that, if possible.
Honestly, I don't have the visibility on, I guess, outcomes or status of issues up in North Carolina. Again, this is FEMA Region 4, so I would request if you could route that through probably Lewis. He could probably get any answers for one of your agencies.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, everyone. Thank you all so much again. Enjoy your afternoon and the rest of your week.